Welcome, everyone. I am Julianne Kirk-Doyle, and I'm a member of the Pedagogy Committee. We are so excited to have Brad Bain and Lee Livengood with us today for a chat about music, mouthpieces, and friendship. So I want to basically just turn this over and let the two of them talk. If you would like to type some questions in the chat, we want to keep these kind of general to mouthpiece discussion. So if something comes to mind, put it in the chat. And when we have an opportunity, I will share those with Brad and Lee. So thank you so much for being with us. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Brad and Lee. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be
Go ahead, Brad. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I know that Lee and I are very excited to talk about all things clarinet and, of course, mouthpieces. And I'll leave now to Lee to speak.
Yes, same. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Especially thank you to Julianne Kirk-Doyle for getting this all organized and all of her pedagogy committee, and also Jessica Harry for this and all the wonderful stuff she does for us in the ICA and the ICA board for having us today. We're really looking forward to discussion coming up here. And I always look forward to talking with Brad anyway. So this is, hope you all will enjoy it too. Brad, I wanted to talk about our history a little, but I wanted to see where you wanted to go with that.
That sounds great. And thank you, Lee, for your kind words to the Pedagogy Committee and my sentiments as well. Lee, please, yes, we'd like to share a little bit about our history and what this meeting is about. And I'll leave Lee to start that conversation and I'll jump in afterwards.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Just to try to give everybody who doesn't know us all that well a quick background. Brad and I have been friends for, I think it's 32 years, 33 years now. And we first met in Tulsa when I won a one-year position in the orchestra there. Brad was already in the orchestra and I joined for that year. And we have a mutual friend, Wilson Ochoa, who's hornist and now principal librarian in Boston Symphony, who kind of helped make the connection between Brad and I. But what very shortly after I got there, it was very apparent that we found a kindred spirit, and that Brad and I had a great deal in common. Also, very apparent that Brad was and is a fabulous clarinet player, and that was great to have a colleague like that going on. But I think Brad and I, we recognized very early, were very curious, very enthusiastic about all things clarinet. We're hands-on, do-it-yourself kind of people, always exploring and finding ways to do things. I know we both came from reed-making traditions with our studies. We're both people really into food and coffee and outdoors, and just a lot of commonality that helped start this relationship from then on. And it's been a great friendship ever since that time. We really, both of us started exploring mouthpieces in detail during that year that we were together in Tulsa. And we unfortunately haven't been able to be members of the same orchestra since that year, but we have had many opportunities, and we look for opportunities to perform together whenever we can. And we have managed to do that over the many years to continue to perform and to try to find all the opportunities we can to geek out and compare notes and play mouthpieces and do all of that geek stuff that we both love so much. The thing that I think is especially notable about our relationship is how open and generous and supportive the communication is and the relationship that we have going on with that. And I know because of having this relationship with Brad, it has really influenced and changed how I am as a clarinet player, and certainly how I am as a mouthpiece maker. We're technically competitors, you know, we both are making and selling mouthpieces, but I've never felt that as a part of our relationship. It's really been about support and encouragement. And I know I've become, as I said, a much better player and mouthpiece maker because of this really unique relationship. So thank you, Brad. It's really been a great ride that I hope we can keep going for a while. But anyway, that's the background. I want to turn it to Brad now to also fill in the gaps here.
Thank you, Lee. I agree. I mean, the fact that we became close friends quite quickly and without a competitive strain holding us back allowed us. I mean, I feel like my mouthpiece learning curve was twice as fast as it would have been without Lee. You know, I would work on a mouthpiece and I would say, "Hey, Lee, can you try it? What do you think?" And I'd get his feedback and I'd learn from my mistakes and from his mistakes. But more importantly, or maybe of equal importance, I would learn from my successes and from Lee's successes, because we were able to have that kind of sharing and supportive tone that lifted us both up. Um, it was such a pleasure right at the beginning. You know, I was 20 something, mid-20s when Lee came to the orchestra in 92. And I think it was 90, was it 91 or 92?
92.
Yeah. And so, you know, at that point in one's early clarinet career, you know, you're really out there on the track trying to win a job. And, you know, not only are we competitors from a mouthpiece point of view, perhaps, but we're also just from a clarinetistic point of view. I mean, we're both fighting for the same jobs in competitive auditions, but we never felt competitive. I remember going to Lee's house one time a few days before a Baltimore Symphony audition, and we would hang out and play excerpts for each other and drink coffee and eat great food and make reeds and adjust reeds and work on mouthpieces. And then we would drive up to Baltimore, and he had a friend that we stayed at that person's house, and it was just great fun. Another one was with the National Symphony, where, boy, if you ever have to audition for the National Symphony, make sure you get the proper exit off of that road. Otherwise, you're going over the Potomac River. And we did it 3 times in a row, and we almost missed the cattle call. Anyway, adventures. We had all sorts of exciting times growing as friends and as musicians and as mouthpiece craftsmen. And that's something that we both agreed early on discussions before this meeting that have been such a profound influence to us at our careers now, that we wanted to really share. I mean, we all need a clarinet buddy. We're better for it. And if you don't have one, find one. You'll be better for it. Quick story, those early days in Tulsa, when I think for me, one of the most profound moments that got me really planted the seed that mouthpieces were an important thing that I want to explore. At that point, I was making my own reeds. I learned how to make reeds in college at Northwestern University. My teacher, Robert Marcellus, encouraged us all to do that. And the university had a reed making machine called the Redual, which is currently available, and everybody should buy one. It's a great tool that can, if I didn't have a reed making machine, I would rather not play the clarinet for a living. It's that important to me. It's a profound influence on my clarinetistry. So I was making reeds, and Lee and I were at that point very much reed geeking on a regular basis together. But one day he came back from a trip to Dallas where he had a day or two experience working with the principal clarinetist of the Dallas Symphony, Steve Gurko, at the time. And he came back with a mouthpiece that Steve had given him that was a Selmer that was refaced by the great Everett Mattson. And I didn't know this, but we were playing the Cuban Overture by Gershwin for a Pops concert. Lee was playing principal clarinet, and my head just turned when he had that cadenza. It was just so resonant, vibrant, effervescent, and ringing with depth and presence and character of sound that I mean, he was a beautiful artist before, but this just made me excited to hear so many additions to his tonal construct. And I think his artistic approach was inspired by what he was hearing, and he was just sparkling on that cadenza. And it was just sort of like this instant just blossoming of wonderfulness that caught my ear. And of course, that then what is going on? We had a conversation during intermission, and he told me this story, how he got the mouthpiece, and immediately the exploration was on, and we both were looking for old mouthpieces from pawn shops and music stores. And shortly thereafter, I think, Lee, you had purchased the measuring gauges from I think it was the Woodwind Brasswind at the time, and I followed fairly quickly with it. And within a short period of time, we were both playing on mouthpieces that we had refaced, just junker mouthpieces. And because of our reed making skills, and at that point we were mature enough with what our understanding of the clarinet, our concepts, what we're looking for, we were able to, I think, both have mouthpieces that we could play on that we had refaced in pretty quick, short order. What does that mean? I think, Lee, you did it in a day or two. Remember, you came. It was amazing. He came to orchestra. It was, at that point we were doing an opera. I don't remember which one. And he said, you said, here, try this, and it played really well. And he had refaced it. So Lee has been not only a great musician influence to me, but I feel like a mouthpiece, a leader in just trying new things. Like, let's try this mouthpiece, and it was an inspiration to me. Let's try getting the measuring tools. Wow, that's cool. And I in those early days, I would often follow his lead on these great, just open-minded, intuitive lines of exploration. And again, having a clarinet buddy can lift you in such a meaningful way. And I think the fact that we were both reed makers at the time was, for me, I'd be curious what you think, Lee, but it gave me a real confident foot to stand on for the next step. I mean, if you can work on a reed, well, why not work on the opposite side of the reed, the mouthpiece? Like those sorts of, like if I'm working on a reed and I feel like I need more long vibrations, and so I'll scrape down below where the lip makes contact to try to open up the vibrations. Well, okay, so what would I do to the reed? Well, maybe I'll do the opposite, do it to the opposite side of the mouthpiece. I'll lengthen the facing curve a little bit to free up those vibrations from the reed, for example. So Lee, I mean, I'm curious about your experience for balancing reeds and mouthpieces in your craft.
Yeah, thank you. I of course, Brad and I, you'll see there's going to be a lot of agreement, a lot of similarity on stuff like that. His point about reeds and how that helped and influenced mouthpiece work is absolutely the same for me, having had that experience and time and training. It did seem to help taking the next step, and we're in some ways kind of doing similar things. You're dealing with shapes and you're removing material like you do on a reed, and it led really naturally into that kind of being able to do the mouthpiece work, facilitate that very easily. And I appreciate, Brad, you're talking about with me jumping in on kind of that stuff, but, Brad has really run with all of this stuff as far as exploring and innovating things. And it's still, every time, we have a conversation, and Brad, be like, oh, hey, guess, like, you got to check this out. And they've come up with another really cool thing related to mouthpieces or to clarinet or something like that. One I had finally, Brad, has his own facility in Oklahoma, and I finally had the opportunity visit that. A lot of this, COVID in all of our lives screwed up a whole bunch of things, but one of them is we didn't see each other very much, and not much traveling. But anyway, I finally had the opportunity to visit Brad's facility in Oklahoma, and I highly recommend that to anybody. Just I've done this a lot, and I certainly know a lot about mouthpieces, but being there was an education for me too, to see all of the incredibly cool, innovative things that he has going on right now in Oklahoma. And you get the opportunity, if you're anywhere or it's worth making the trip, I would say, to try to check that out. I know it has really influenced my playing hugely to have the knowledge I have and the abilities I have with mouthpieces and reeds. I know I'm a vastly better player than I would be without that. And I think that's one of the things, hopefully, that we can share, and hopefully encourage everybody to continue to explore. The more knowledge you have about your equipment, and the better choices you're going to make, and the better player that you're going to be.
Thanks for your kind words, Lee. I appreciate it. The whole thing about mouthpieces is it's just an extension of what we do as artists. I mean, we're doing this primarily because we're inspired, and it comes, what we do comes from every fiber of our being, from our hearts. And whatever ideas that I have that I've explored, and in some cases I have some patents. They were all because I'm just trying to make a better playing experience for myself, and then if I can share and help others have a better playing experience. And I'm sure it's the same thing for you, Lee. I mean, it comes from your heart, and it's wonderful to be able to on a Friday morning make a reed or work on a mouthpiece, and then go and play it in rehearsal that night, and then maybe that afternoon, and then perform on it that evening. I mean, how thrilling is it that your artistry can come not only from your heart but from your hands, and it becomes a real organic experience that is fulfilling and has a lot of personal rewards. So whatever thing. I mean, right now I'll go get it. I'm working on a tip gauge. So this is our latest new tool. I don't know if it can get into focus, but is it not in focus? This is the latest idea. You put the mouthpiece down, and it gives you a digital reading on the tip opening. And it's just another thing that, because we have a factory, we can actually explore how to make the workflow better, not just a better mouthpiece, but the tools to make better mouthpieces. That's what kick we're on these days. So it's been a lot of fun to have that facility. So back on reeds, I think that that was a wonderful sort of a foundation, so that from there I can stay grounded and make a consistent mouthpiece, and I can offer mouthpiece solutions to people who might not be as skilled with reeds as well. Ultimately, what is the purpose of the reed? It's sort of like the engine. It vibrates, and then the mouthpiece cultivates those vibrations, and then converts that energy into a sound which is, well, hopefully pleasing. And I think that one of the hitches that a lot of clarinetists have is that they're playing on a reed that's fundamentally not vibrating as effectively as it could. And first and foremost, I think that vibration needs to be relatively easy. And I think to my ear, one of the things that I hear when I work with clients is the sound of effort. And I, as a mouthpiece maker, and as a reed maker, and as a clarinetist, I don't want to hear effort. I want to hear musicianship. And what do I mean by effort? Well, tonal inclusions, air hissing, that's a portion of the reed that's just not vibrating, and it's just wasted energy flowing through the instrument. Ideally, it's not an easy thing to nail 100% of the time, but it's a quest that I'm always very cognizant of. and desiring is 100% efficiency. I want no wasted air going through the instrument. When you have full efficiency, the reed is working for me entirely. It lets me play forever on a phrase, like the A clarinet solo to Brahms' Third Symphony. I want to be able to do the whole thing on one breath. If I can't, there's something wrong. And what is wrong? Well, I'm not experiencing 100% efficiency. I want to be able to play certain litmus tests. I want to be able to play a loud passage, a soft passage, and so forth. And a good reed will allow me to do that. We should all play on a good reed. And from a good reed comes a good sound, a good playing experience, and inspiration. I think the inspiration word is something that I've said a lot thus far, and it's probably the nucleus of everything that we do, isn't it? As musicians, from that inspiration blossoms everything else. Lee, I'll let you talk.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. I think that's led, if those of you out there who know Brad and I or have had experience with playing the stuff that we make, as far as balancing things are concerned, I think both of us are into vibrant, not hard reeds, well balanced, good sounding reeds, not resistant setups. I think maybe someone might find my mouthpiece or Brad's mouthpiece resistant if your setup is used to playing a 4+ or really, really hard reeds. But over the amount of time that Brad and I have done this, hard reed just does not seem to be the way. It's definitely not our way to make this work and to get to the whole idea Brad's talking about with efficiency. You're trying to find that balance between the reed and the mouthpiece. And if the reed is very hard or very unvibrant, you can try to do things to the mouthpiece to make it compensate for that. But it's been my experience that a mouthpiece with great intonation and great structure with a vibrant reed is where you're going to ultimately have the most flexibility and the most ease on everything. Brad, I'll turn that back to you to.
Yeah.
Jump in real quick. There's a couple of questions in the chat. One, let's see, how important is correctly balancing the ears of the reed for you, and what percentage of the quality of reed does it make for you?
Can I answer that, please? Again, from a point of inspiration, I remember at the clarinet conference in Ostend, Belgium, it was probably 5 years ago. I had lunch with my friend Peter Leutner, who is a phenomenal expert reed maker from Vienna. And we were talking about something similar to that question. And I said, what about the tip? I feel like everything starts at the tip. I remember the Daniel Bonad reed notebook. It was back in the days of the Clarinet ICA journal, when it was the size of a Reader's Digest magazine. And there was a page just with his notes. And he said that everything starts at the tip with the reed. It has to be balanced, and then you work down from there. And so I was asking Peter, what about the tip? Do you feel like it needs to flex equally, corner to corner, ear to ear, and then center? Or are you looking for some other interesting strategy? And he said, well, actually, the secret is to make the tip of the reed flex more than the corners. And I thought, this is very interesting. So I explored with that, and I found that it really it releases a nice, crackling, spirited response. If the ears, the corners being the same thing, I think ears are probably the result of oboe making with their little mandrel that has a little ears. Anyway, the corners or the ears of the reed, if they flex more than the center, like if the heart goes all the way, extends all the way to the very tip, there's a resistance that is at the tip that adds a softening or dulling element to the response that I don't prefer. I prefer a really nice, supple response that allows me to just touch the reed with, as if I'm touching one taste bud of my tongue on one xylem of the reed. That kind of minimalism enables, from there, I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous statement. It's probably impossible to do, but I can strive for that in how I finesse the reed. From there, then I can certainly do more pressure and or contact mass, but yeah, I want to be able to do as little as possible. If I can do that, I can have a lot more options of articulation. How many types of articulation are there? Staccato, legato, and that thing that doesn't have a line or a dash on the note? 3? No, infinite. I don't want to be able to have just 2 or 3 or even 4 options. I want to just have articulation be limitless. And I think that articulation is kind of, again, the crux, the nucleus from which everything else comes. It's the start of the note, right? And when I'm talking, I might be articulate, marcato with how I'm speaking to you right now with a sense of urgency, or I might be kind of very calm at the end of the day and almost slurring my words in a sense of relax. Well, the same thing when we play the clarinet. If articulation is limitless, your musicianship has much more stuff that my human condition can relate to. So to answer the question simply, I want to have the tip of my reed flex more than the ears, but it must be balanced with the equal flex ear to ear, and then a little bit more on the tip. So thickness of the reed. If I caliper the corners of the reed, the ears, maybe 10 to 12 hundredths of a millimeter, and then the very tip might be 8 to 10 hundredths of a millimeter. I have a digital caliper, and I do that sort of thing all the time. I feel like the tip is where everything is so crucial, like Bonad said. So ultimately, though, what's more important is the flex. It has to flex evenly. If you've got a reed that has more xylems on one side and fewer on the other side, well, the xylems are harder than the pith of the cane. So you need to make the xylem side a little bit thinner to flex the same as the pithy side. But even more importantly, I want to start with a good piece of cane. So if the reed is obviously out of balance because of a density area that on one side and that doesn't exist on the other, probably I'm not even going to really waste my time with it. Might be a practice reed or something like that, but I would rather practice on performance reeds. The answer to that, how can you possibly have so many good reeds in your case that you would be willing to do that? Well, just spend 15 minutes a day on reeds. You know, I'll make a reed every day. It keeps the psychiatrist away. Those aren't my words. Those are John Mack's, but they're brilliant ones. So I've been rambling a little bit, Lee. I'm going to yield the floor to you.
Oh no, it's great. Thanks. I was going to jump ahead. Daniel has a question in the chat about material. You know, what about material, old rubber versus new? And it's also saying symmetric versus asymmetric, which I assume that has to do also with facings. But I was going to start off talking a little bit about material, and I'll talk a little and turn that back to you, Brad. But anyway, I think everybody has noticed that material now with mouthpieces, it's wide open. The traditional material is hard rubber, and if you know my mouthpieces, you know that I'm known for doing mouthpieces with coloration in them, which means that there are different minerals mixed into the hard rubber in order to create the color. Brad has different rubbers that he uses, and he has a proprietary rubber, and he can talk about that. But you know, there's quite a few mouthpieces now that are not made with hard rubber at all. Synthetics are becoming very common. A lot of, you know, so-called plastic mouthpieces or polymer mouthpieces from major mouthpiece makers are out there. So there's a wide variety to choose from, you know. I have Rubbermaid that I like. I mean, part of it is who I am and my aesthetic. I enjoy the colors visually. I also think the colors make a difference sonically, and that's where I'm going. There's manufacturers that are making, most of the mouthpieces are made out of a polymer. They're made out of plastic, and a lot of people are playing them and like those resonance characteristics that you get with that. Um, and Brad, I know you're using different materials now. I mean, the whole thing with 3D printing, which is, I'm aware of, but it's not something I actively do. But Brad, I know your company is involved with that and many things. Oh, and also starting with mouthpieces. So let me turn it back to you to just talk a little more about material.
Yeah, I think the last 5, 10, 15 years have been a really interesting time, because more and more clarinet mouthpiece makers exist. We're probably 10 years behind all of the innovative spirit of the saxophone mouthpiece making community in terms of creativity and trying new things. But back to clarinet, it is interesting that more materials are being explored. I think that the audience might want to know, well, what is the difference in the sound between plastic and rubber and different types of other material like glass or metals and things like that? Surprisingly little, but boy, that little makes a huge difference. It's like the special spices that make a dish have a personality. So with reeds too, synthetic reeds versus cane reeds, that's a whole another topic. But I think they share a similar sound signature. Cane has more spring and more overtones in the mix. In particular, the upper overtones that are in cane, whereas synthetics, plastics tend to be lacking the full spectrum of overtones. Lacking might not be a fair word, but missing. In other words, what is a dark sound versus a bright sound? So I'm rambling here. I'll try to bring it home as quickly as possible. To my ear, I mean, a lot of people have different definitions. A dark sound is one that's sweet. A dark sound is one that is not edgy. Well, what is edgy? So I'll just define it the way I think of it. Dark sound is one where, the clarinet is a series of overtones. You've got the fundamental, the 12th, the 17th, and so on. It goes up. And at the very top of that stack of overtones are the upper partials. And I think that cane has more of those. It goes higher up the stack, and they're louder, the upper partials, in the overall balance, the EQ. And then the great thing about reed craftsmanship is that you can balance those overtones to become very sweet and warm and rich and resonant and responsive and everything else, which then allows me to have a sound that is resonant. And I don't use the word dark or bright. I use the word resonant when I'm describing all of the overtones really beautifully assembled. Beautifully meaning it's something that is pleasing to the human condition. And so it's very subjective. It's very personal. And that's one of the things that makes music beautiful. It makes the fact that the guy in Hungary sounds different than the gal in Turkey and the person in America. We all have, and so on. We all have a different sound. Although perhaps over the last 20 or 30 years, those sounds are becoming a little bit more similar because, the borders are more free and with audio recordings and everything else, it's more accessible. So back to material, I think hard rubber has a more complete array of overtones. There are more upper partials. And there are more sparkling, effervescent spice components to the sound. Those are the upper partials, as I describe them, as compared to some of the synthetics. Some plastic mouthpieces are very appealing to players looking for a darker concept. But on dark, I definitely want to talk about dark and bright sounds and mouthpiece design in a separate conversation. So the mouthpiece, like cane, the rubber on a mouthpiece material and cane on a reed material is, I think, more rich with a full array of partials, and in particular the upper partials. I'll leave it to you to add, Lee.
Yeah, I've spent some time with my good friend and a retired colleague from Utah Symphony, Russ Harlow, who introduced me to speaking of evolution and how things are moving so fast. There's a program called software program Voce Vista, and it's a spectrum analysis. So you can play into it and each note, and it will show you all the stuff Brad is talking about, all the partials that you can see them visually, see them. It's really fascinating to play and to analyze your sound. And that really helps, just for you to get an idea of what's going on with your own sound. And you can see differences in the equipment that you're playing, different mouthpieces, different reeds, different for clarinets, so many different variables. But it's been really fascinating to do that. It's also one of the best things about it is it's an ear training device. You will get where you can really hear the upper partials that Brad is talking about in the sound if it's present. And Russ has done a lot of stuff with trying to figure out how can you enhance that with how you play the instrument even. Really fascinating thing. I think also is it Amadeus Pro maybe also has a spectrum analysis feature that someone was telling me about. Anyway, might be a very interesting thing to explore. I know it's definitely been interesting for me and influenced what I do as a player and also what I'm trying to do designing mouthpieces. So
just do a quick shout out to Russell,
yeah.
who's in the room, and he has a phenomenal video on YouTube where he discusses exactly what you were mentioning, and everybody should view it. He plays in it and he sounds beautiful, and then he evaluates some of the great sounds from the era that you, Russell, and I and many others have such inspiration from, Ralph McLean and others. Go check it out on YouTube. Russell Harlow, you'll find it.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to see, Brad, I'm looking at questions in the chat that I think a couple of ones I think might be helpful. Someone's asking about contemporary mouthpieces versus vintage mouthpieces and differences and ideas on that. Do you want to take some of that?
Yeah, I think the world is going darker and darker of late. You compare the sounds of the 60s and it's, the clarinet players are dulling out the upper partials. I'm using a sort of a personal bias word, dull. It's sad to me to witness the detuning of the clarinet sound through mouthpiece design that is both a combination of the materials which are lesser in their they excluded partials from the way they sound, as well as the designs. And so here we're going to get into that a little bit. It's very common that people want to have an easy, free-blowing experience that's warm and takes the edge out of their reeds that they find displeasing. And many players will ultimately migrate to a synthetic reed because they're so frustrated with cane reeds. And I think that they're selling themselves short, because ultimately a cane reed will will produce, I think, and I know that Lee, you've been playing and doing many explorations on synthetics and finding really good results. And this is something that we should illuminate to the audience, that there's real great potential and possibility there. You just have to be willing to dig in and work on those reeds just like you would on cane to unleash their true resonance potential and comfort potential. But with the design, it's common to see a thick railed mouthpiece to serve people with a dark tonal concept, which is where modern mouthpieces and modern sensibilities have been united. And I think it's not necessary, because when you widen the rails and you use materials which both are dulling out those upper partials, you're taking sound away from your sound. And what I want to do is include all of the partials and have a full resonant sound, but I'm more interested in EQing it, balancing it so that the sound becomes sweet and beautiful and it functions properly. Like a full resonant sound will carry much farther. And when I'm in the orchestra and I'm playing something soft, I still want that sound to serve the purposes of the composer's wish, the ensemble's needs. I want the concertmaster to still be able to hear me, and we can make music together even though we're 40 or 50 feet away from each other. And that requires resonance, clarity, efficiency, and proper materials and proper design can allow for that and create a darker sound as well. I can create a very dark, rich, resonant mouthpiece. I'm sure you can too, Lee, with proper rails that are not wide. But I think the common wisdom, the current crop of clarinetists generally think that wide rails create a darker sound. And that would be a conversation I would welcome. Lee, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Brad and I obviously don't go, that's not the direction that we've chosen to go with how we work on and how we design the mouthpieces, because we're trying to get as much resonance as possible and trying to get the efficiency as possible. And a very open mouthpiece with wide rails is not going to do that. It's going to take away overtones. It's going to, it's a different kind of playing experience.
In my experience, a great old mouthpiece, which is something that I've always admired and I've had much experience with, they tend to be brighter than the current, modern mouthpiece. In a simple way of defining it, older mouthpieces were brighter, but I'm not using the word bright as a negative. Do you agree that they were brighter?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So one might consider bright as a good. What is about bright? Well, bright carries. Bright adds interesting components. That day that Lee inspired me playing the Cuban Overture, he was brighter. He was on a dark construct mouthpiece, wide rails, sort of more modern sensibilities of that time period. The mouthpiece that he was playing was advancing the dark art form in the early days of that conceptual approach. But when he played the brighter mouthpiece, the Selmer that was refaced by Everett Madsen, it was far more interesting and compelling, to me at least.
Yeah.
And I'll say that Lee was a well-loved member of the orchestra, so maybe that sound had something to do with why he was loved.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. I'm looking again at the chat to see, because I don't watching our time to try to still see what we can get. I'm going to hit a few things really quick to just finish up with. I think we can combine a couple of ones. Material. We've talked about that a lot in the different varieties. A lot of old rubber. At this point, the technology is so good, we can have the rubber made to all, different formulas, different standards, can emulate old rubber very well now, because we just have the ability with the manufacturing. So I don't personally see an advantage in mouthpiece just because the rubber is old, because we can basically get it already by how that rubber is made. with everything. Also, older mouthpieces, there were some great crafts people back in the day who made these, when you have the Shedvilles and Roberts and Caspers and storied mouthpieces. And it was hard to find good mouthpieces. And that's why these, I think, came so much to the fore. But not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but it's changed so much. There are great mouthpieces available. It's, you know, there's so many makers. Technology is going so fast. There are great mouthpieces, so it's hard to, you know, you don't need to find that really special Casper, because I think there are makers who are making mouthpieces that are at that level or higher now. We just have access to the materials, we have access to the technology, with the CNC machining and digital design components that are available now. There's so much that you can do with a mouthpiece. We can change the designs of our mouthpiece. Now it's just a matter of changing the computer program, the digital design, and sending it to the CNC. There's so many possibilities going on with that. I know it's another thing that we should probably try to hit, Brad, is as far as suggestions on asking about trying out mouthpieces. A good question from Victoria also about, when someone is working with us, what do we find, what kind of feedback can they provide that would be helpful for us, helping them to get to a mouthpiece? So wonder what you have on that.
Yeah, when I work with a new client, I like to spend a few minutes to sort of have a conversation, get in their head, and then I think it's important that they feel comfortable to communicate in a way, in their own words, that they feel comfortable. They have to be willing to say what I'm doing that works and what doesn't work. So I tell them, you know, you're not going to offend me if when we're working, if you say, no, this is not good, because then I can triangulate on the different techniques that I'm doing that were successful and eliminate the passes that weren't so good. So I don't know that I have a very simple, clear, articulate way of saying, you know, if you could come up with a list of this, that, and the other way of communicating. But I will say, if you can come up prepared with 2 or 3 reeds, you know, a good, comfortable reed, and one that might be a slightly firmer, good, comfortable reed, and one that is a slightly softer, good, comfortable reed, all 3 of those being relatively new and clean representatives of what you're used to playing. And then from there, we can, you know, make a mouthpiece that works for your specific reed style. And then we can have the conversation. That said, I often, going back to reeds, it's so much about reeds. I'll add, you know, it all starts from the top. My concept, the reed, and then the mouthpiece, in that order of importance. And with the mouthpiece, you know, we've talked a little bit about materials. The material is really important, but you can't underestimate the design. And I think that the great thing about what you were talking about, Lee, with the CNC machines and the ability to do the digital mapping of the baffle and the sidewalls and all of that, is we have this tremendous way to sculpt the mouthpiece digitally first and really create a complex geometric 3-dimensional form that we can then test with 3D print samples, and then make sure it's all doing everything the way we want it to do, and before we go into production. We have so many possibilities of research and development that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago, and 100 years ago, and so forth. So I don't know, Lee, do you have any simple homework or anything that the player can come up with, or words to describe what they're looking for?
I do try to get people to just focus on the comfort with the mouthpiece. If it plays easily and naturally for you, that's going to be the mouthpiece that's going to ultimately work and allow you to have the kind of playing and the kind of sound you want. And sometimes I try to focus it more on resistances and dealing with resistance to your air, and what Brad, you know, call resistance to your embouchure. You know, can you play? I don't think you should have to have a really strong muscular approach with the mouthpiece reed combination to make things go. I think we both feel less is more on that, that you have a good embouchure, but it's not anything that has to be really hard or strong, but it just makes a nice seal around the mouthpiece, but still allows you to be flexible. And I know there's getting back to Russell has helped us a lot with that. Also, of using the embouchure and finding, ways that helps your playing and your flexibility and all of that kind of stuff. So thinking about the resistance, the air resistance, the embouchure resistance, it either does it want to collapse, do you have to bite it too hard? Those type of things, I think, are helpful for me. I was going to say one other thing quickly. We have a likelihood of running out of time coming up. That all of you who are here, there's so many fantastic questions. I fear we probably won't get to all of them today, but do feel free to reach out to either Brad or I or both with anything. I know both through our websites, easy link to send an email to communicate with us, and I know we would be happy to answer any other questions or anything that I won't get to today, which I think is quite a few things, because this is a conversation. Brad and I will be on the phone and suddenly 3 hours will have gone by and we're talking about something about mouthpieces or reeds. So yeah.
Can I jump in? And of course, at the end of those 3 hours, I feel smarter and richer for having spent that time. So it's all good. I pride myself that, I mean, how cool is it that with Lee and with me as mouthpiece makers, that you, the client, the customer, can become friends with the person who's making one of the most important parts of your gear, your setup, and you can have a conversation with that person, and you can have that person basically, go on the bench and have you in their headspace while they craft a work of art that you will then have for your musicianship. That's a very special thing. We mouthpiece makers are artists, sculptors, and clarinetists, and that take you very seriously. And I think that's a special add to the experience. If you can purchase a mouthpiece that comes from the hand of the maker rather than we have 2 CNC machines in our factory, but everything that comes off the CNC machine still goes through my post-process. And, in some cases, it's a very extensive process because my personal clarinetistry is embedded in that. And I know Lee would say the same thing. And so for you to sell the idea of what we do and others, how cool is it that you can, have a conversation, a relationship with the person who's making your gear? That's not a common thing in this modern world. I can't go and contact, Mr. Toyota and have him custom make my car. But I can contact Mr. Livengood and have him custom make a mouthpiece, which I would, by the way, Lee and I can play on each other's gear. It's really cool. And you should all have a friend that you can trade, here, try this, try that, and be willing to do that with, because that can be one of the most profound moments. I mean, I still remember trying a friend's setup in college, and I realized instantly, oh my gosh, I am working way too hard on my personal setup. That setup that guy plays is easy, and it sounds bolder and fuller and so responsive. What am I doing? And that was like 100 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Just that instant 4-dimensional trading off of experience can go a long way. I'm rambling again. Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm wondering how much time we have left. I'll answer a couple of other questions. I think I can quickly. Our friend Andrew was asking about alter the design of the mouthpiece for synthetic reeds. I know I think it's more a voice facings, especially if I know a client is using a synthetic reed and a particular synthetic reed, that I can usually handle that with how I voice the mouthpiece. So I guess that's somewhat not really so much of design, like a different kind of chamber or size or any of that kind of stuff.
Lee,
And yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
when Lee and I got together and did geeking in November, and we had some of the French cut Léger reeds going, and it was neat because we both agreed instantly when we play tested the reed that hip was vibrating more, and then from the heart back it was resisting. So we needed to free up that part of the reed, and so there's a little spine down the middle, and with the reed knife, just scrape that, play it, scrape it a little more until it feels good, and all of a sudden the sound is better, it's more resonant, and the comfort increased significantly. So don't be afraid to work on the synthetic reeds and just go by feel. Feel is so important. You've got to have a concept of what a good setup should feel like. Please.
Yeah, no, and yeah, you can try the mouthpieces, work with your maker to help dial that in if that's the direction that you want to go. I have when I've worked on synthetic reeds, I tend to stay away from the tip. That has been difficult area on a synthetic, sort of opposite of what Brad was talking about, how much you can do and how critical. There's probably a way to do it on a synthetic reed, but I haven't discovered it myself yet in a way that's been successful. But towards the back, that's helped immensely.
But the good thing about synthetics is the material is of consistent density, vibrational characteristics throughout. And so typically, I mean, the tips of synthetic reeds are pretty well balanced as they come. The key thing is when you look at the reed tip on, as I'm looking at it, you want to make sure that it's not warped or curved. It should be perfectly flat across. And sometimes they're manufactured with without that being perfectly flat. And in that case, I would move on to one that is flat. Your response and your comfort will appreciate that scrutiny. Same thing with cane reeds. Right. Cane reeds have to be flat too.
Yeah. What was I looking at? See if we have one more. Refacing. This is another thing. I think, Brad, you get these questions too, where people are like, "Oh, I'm really interested in what you do, and I've seen you do some things at other times, and where do you, how do you do this, and where do you get this equipment?" And that's a problem. Hopefully, Brad is working on solving some of that. If we can get because the old fashioned, it was tip wand that came from 100 years ago from Eric Brandis. Not just, no one is making some of the gear that we have used for the last 30 years. But I've got my fingers crossed that I'm going to have a new Brad Bain tip gauge, digital tip gauge here soon, and that everyone else will be able to help you even if you just want to understand what your mouthpiece tip opening is in a nice, easy way. So I keep looking for developments on that.
Yeah, the tools, it's tricky. Fortunately, I've got a stash of some of the old tools like the glass gauges and things, but even that's a tricky one. If you're looking for a good setup of glass gauges, there's a company called Reface Ace that Lee, you told me about a few months ago, and that's a good quality glass gauge. The feeler gauges, just, you can get them at Harbor Freight for pretty inexpensive, like $3-4 for cheap ones. And the trick is to find the 40 thousandths and the 50 thousandths and the 100 thousandths if you're doing big things like tenor saxophone mouthpieces or even bass clarinet mouthpieces. It's good to have those other sizes, but they exist. Keep your eye on Amazon and other places, and you'll find them for relatively inexpensive. The tip gauge is the thing that doesn't exist for metric dimensions. You can get Reface Ace has the thousandths gauges in miniature tip wands. This gauge will do I don't know why it doesn't want to focus, but this is what we're working on, and it does thousandths or metric, imperial or metric, both. And bore gauges, that's another one. So we're developing a tool line. Can I just say I've had a great time here, and as you can tell, I feel like Lee and I are just getting warmed up. Thank you so much for all the questions. Apologies for the ones that we didn't answer. I think there was one from Simon. He was asking, what have we not done that you is next? What else comes? And Lee, I'm curious, Lee was kind to say that I'm coming up with ideas. Well, Lee is a great idea man too. And I'm curious if, he's the thing about Lee is he's very clear and concise with his objectives and his thinking process. It's an inspiration to me. And so can I poke you with, what's in your head? What's in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I am very curious about how 3D printing is going to affect things. If we can get where the materials can be used in 3D, to do what we do, but have it that next level of control. Because you have to CNC, mouthpieces. It's complicated. I have a company. I don't have my own place like Brad. I have a company in Salt Lake City that I work with, and it takes a lot to do a run of mouthpieces on CNC. And if you want to make a change, there's a lot of things that happen. And if we can 3D print, you change the program and away you go. So I'm very curious if that. I know it will develop where that's going to be a thing we can really use in our mouthpiece work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, recently the patents opened up, so the world exploded with 3D printers, and there were a lot of very inexpensive hobby machines for just a few $100s, but it required a lot of tinkering. And now some developments with some companies making some 3D printers that are pretty user friendly and pretty consistent. And anybody could basically, you could even go online and find a free mouthpiece model that can be 3D printed, and anybody can do it almost. The problems are that we're not there yet with the resonance characteristics of the 3D printed materials. There are some companies that do make 3D printed both types, resin or FDM, the filament, which is squirted out like a toothpaste nozzle that builds up. And we, in our 3D print farms, we have 3 resin printers and like 10 FDM style printers. When we make various things from some mouthpieces to a lot of different reed cases and things like that. This tip gauge is the housing is 3D printed, but the resin, I think, has more potential because has better resolution, and I think it sounds better than the FDM style. That said, the FDM style has served the jazz saxophone community fairly effectively because it's kind of brighter, and like in the jazz saxophone community, they use the word edge as a positive. Like there's a company that calls one of their mouthpieces the Edge. Like that's a good thing, right? That's going to sell more. And it's interesting, the saxophone and the clarinet, we share the single reed mouthpiece construct, but we have nothing else in common in many respects. But I think, Lee, you're really right that the 3D printing has a lot of potential. You can 3D print metals now. But a lot of the 3D printing stuff still needs extensive post-processing by hand to get it to look good and to perform right. And I think resin can have both better surface finishes, resolution, and it also sounds better. And we've explored that quite extensively, and looking forward to the future.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Brad. Great time today.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure.